Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Barcelona got their first La Liga win of the season with a 4-1 win over Real Sociedad, thanks to a Lewandowski double, Fati and Ousmane Dembele, whilst Isak scored for La Real. The XG showed that on the balance of play it was a deserved win, but the XG time app does show that it was a late flurry that made all the difference for Barcelona. But what tactics does Xavi use with his new signings? Let's take a look. On paper, it looked like Barcelona may have been lining up in their usual 4-3-3 shape, and this may have been something that Real Sociedad were anticipating, as in their 4-4-2 diamond they would have been perfectly positioned to press higher up, making progression through the midfield much more difficult as they would have been picked up man to man. But instead, Barcelona were actually lining up in more of a back three, with Dembele playing as the right wing back and Balde out as the left wing back. Firstly, this meant where Sociedad's front two would have been pressing the two centre backs, now Barcelona had an extra man, meaning they had a 3 versus 2, giving them more potential to play out. And Barcelona's structure in the midfield was really interesting. With Sociedad using a midfield diamond, Barcelona may have been anticipating being overloaded in the midfield region. So, to match up with Real Sociedad's midfield 4, they also switched to a modified midfield 4. That involved Dembele and Balde holding the width, and Lewandowski was still the sole forward. Instead, Pedri and Ferran Torres operated in the half spaces, whilst Xavi and De Jong formed a double pivot. This means that Barcelona's build-up shape was an interesting 3-2-2-3. We can also see this in the average positions. So here we get a general feel for Barcelona's build-up shape, with a back three that was combined with a double pivot of Frenkie de Jong as well as Xavi. Run it on and you can see the wider midfielders in Pedri and Ferran Torres operating in these wider regions, almost in the half spaces and almost out wide at certain times. So you can see a back three, a double pivot, two midfielders ahead of that, and then you have Balde and Dembele ahead of these two, meaning that at times this also could look like a traditional front three. So, as a result of the 4 versus 4 in the midfield, Barcelona didn't dominate because of numbers, but rather it was now up to individual quality. So these 1 versus 1 situations meant that the match could be scrappy at times. One advantage it did give them was the 2 versus 1 against Silva, so it was often now easier for Barcelona to find space to play to the double pivots. So here you can see that David Silva is outnumbered 2 versus 1 against Barcelona's double pivot of Xavi and Frenkie de Jong. Running it on, now when the centre-back does receive, it means that he has 2 options to potentially play out to, depending on who Silva covers more. So now when de Jong does receive the ball, he can look to turn and progress forward. Later on, one way Sociedad did look to adapt to this was by playing with more of a front 3. Which involved Silva being more of a false 9, defensively speaking at least, whilst Isak and Kubo were the wide men. These 3 would play extremely narrow and would look to use their cover shadow to prevent entry into the pivots, whilst at the same time they could look to create pressing situations 1 versus 1. But in general, in the first half in particular, with Sociedad having this shape, the 3 versus 2 meant that it was often Araujo who was able to receive the ball in space and look to drive higher up the pitch when possible. But overall, it was the wide regions that were the key for Barcelona. This was thanks to both Dembele and Balde, as well as the substitute when they came on, holding their position high up the pitch in order to tie up the fullbacks. This would result in space in the wider regions. So we could often see both Pedri and Ferran Torres looking to drop into these pockets, as they could create 2 versus 1 situations in these scenarios. So, if the Sociedad midfielder was drawn to a pivot to help Silva, we would often see Pedri look to receive wider, and then he could look to drive up the pitch and look to make a difference higher up. At the same time, if the wide midfielder now looked to cover the man here, if Silva was not able to recover in time, it would then open up the pass into a pivot. So this was the common scenario. Barcelona had their double pivot of de Jong and Xavi, and in this situation, Ferran and Balde have rotated, but the principle is the same, as we have both Pedri and Balde looking to receive outside of the midfield, and if they were able to be found by passes, they could then turn and look to face the goal. But what we also did see on rarer occasions was how the winger could look to drop deep at times, drawing the fullback who had been fixated on them higher up the pitch. This would then open up space behind the fullback, where the man in the half space could then look to make the run to receive the pass, and either have time to look for a cross or draw a centre-back out of position. Here we see the familiar midfield four of Barcelona high up the pitch. And instead of holding his width higher up the pitch as he had been doing, Dembele instead looks to drop towards the ball when it does come. This immediately draws the fullback out of position, and we see that Pedri is looking to make the run in behind him. In this situation, the centre-back is looking to go towards him as well, but you can see how this has now potentially opened up a passing lane towards Lewandowski. But there were other ways for Barcelona to make the most of this shape in the wide regions. Firstly, they could look to drag Sociedad across to one side of the pitch. And in these situations, Pedri would maintain his positioning in the half space, and this could draw the fullback out of position, and Dembele as always was holding his width. As a result, there was plenty of potential to switch the ball out towards Dembele for 1 versus 1, where he could then look to take on his man or swing across into the box. Here we see the perfect example of this, as Sociedad have been dragged across to one side of the pitch. Pedri maintains his positioning in the half space, and now he looks to make the run between the fullback and the centre-back. This naturally draws the fullback in towards him, and although the pass is going towards Pedri, you can see how this would have potentially left Dembele free to receive a switch where he could then look to attack his man. And the alternative to this is the fullback looking to hold his width on Dembele, and of course this would then leave Pedri free in the half space to make a run and look to receive in a dangerous position. So here we see a similar situation where Sociedad have been dragged across to one side of the pitch. Ansu Fati has come on, and like the men before him, he's looking to occupy the space between the centre-back and the full-back in the midfield. This then potentially leaves Dembele free out wide to receive the ball. The ball first goes to Fati, which then draws the full-back in completely, and then this frees Dembele to get on the end of a pass, and he's able to produce an outstanding finish. So those were some of Xavi's ideas in attack, but let's quickly touch on what he did in defense. Xavi's shape would adapt when pressing. Dembele and Balde still operated in an aggressive manner, looking to press the respective fullbacks high up the pitch. But where before Pedri and Torres had occupied these positions, we would often see Pedri occupy a centre-back alongside Lewandowski so that they were in man-to-man situations. It would then be up to Ferran Torres to tie up the pivot in these situations. When the wider midfielders from Sociedad looked to make themselves available, both pivots were willing to push high up and commit in trying to prevent them getting the ball. This would then make it extremely difficult for Sociedad to get out in the first phase, but at the same time it allowed them to have plenty of men between the lines. So, on the situations where they were able to break the line, Silva, Kubo or Isaac could get on the ball and then look to drive forward, as they would look to create combinations. So here with the general pressing shape from Barcelona, with Lewandowski and Pedri looking to occupy the two centre-backs. And it is up to Ferran Torres to then look to tie up the pivot. Again, both Dembele and Balde are looking to be aggressive on the fullbacks, whilst De Jong and Xavi are willing to go pivot to pivot, leaving space for Silva in these higher positions. But one glaring weakness we did see from Barcelona, particularly higher up, was that with the front two, the back three were often drawn extremely narrow, as they were worried about the space between the central centre-back and the wider centre-back. This would of course leave acres of space out wide, and Dembele is naturally a winger as we know, so he would be slow to track back. Merino from left central midfield was then highly aggressive and looked to make these runs down the outside, and a forward could then look to make a run on the inside, freeing the pass out to Merino, and he got into several dangerous situations in this manner. Again, we can see how the Sociedad front two forces the Barcelona back three to play extremely narrow, and this leaves space for Sociedad to attack down the outside. It's not Merino this time, but still, Dembele's unaware defensive position means that there is plenty of room to find the man down the outside. Overall, this wasn't a vintage performance from Xavi's Barcelona, and there is a lot of room to grow, but these are just a few of the ideas he was looking to implement in this match. As always, not every tactic was covered, so leave anything else you noticed down in the comments below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.